Tea with Tolkien, an online community for the Hobbit at heart. We are inspired by the works, life, and Catholic faith of JRR Tolkien, and strive to encourage others towards a deeper love and understanding of Tolkien's Legendarium by hosting a free book club, providing free resources such as our Silmarillion Reader's Guide, and by cultivating a vibrant and positive community online. Our book club is currently reading through the Fall of Númenor, and if you would like to join in on the discussion, you can sign up for our book club at teawithtolkien.com/book-club to receive the link to our Discord server and everything else that you need to know. For the sake of this book club, I've broken the Fall of Númenor down into 10 sections, and so this week we will be covering the 4th section. This video contains my notes from this section, as well as a summary of the discussion that occurred in our live voice chat. So this week we are discussing part 4, which is the first half of the chunk in the middle of the book that covers the stories of Aldarion and Erendis. So this week is titled Aldarion and Erendis Part 1, and we will be covering pages 66 through 82, which spans years 800 through about 870 of the Second Age. Aldarion and Erendis. At this point, the sea longing returned to Aldarion. He formed the Guild of Venturers, of which Aldarion was the great captain, and he lived in a ship called Eambar, which meant sea-dwelling, and on this ship was the guild house of the Venturers. Aldarion had a particular devotion to Uinen. The Venturers called themselves the Uinen-Dili, the lovers of Uinen. Now Tar-Meneldur was displeased by Aldarion's love for the sea and his restlessness, and at this point they were estranged. The king set a curb on the felling of trees in Númenor for the building of vessels, and so Aldarion built a haven for his ships and sought timber in Middle-earth instead. In Middle-earth, he established the haven called Vinyalande, which means New Haven. Year 800, Tar-Meneldur commanded Aldarion to remain in Númenor, where he was declared the king's heir, and they were reconciled for a time. Now in this time, Erendis, daughter of Berengar, she came across Aldarion. She thought he was really something, and she fell in love with him, despite his insistence that he would not marry anytime soon. 6 years after he had been initially commanded to remain in Númenor, Aldarion decided to leave once more, and he did this even though he was relatively into Erendis, and he was gone for 7 years at this point. The king became concerned that Aldarion wouldn't be able to rule the people of Númenor because he really never spent any time at home, which I think is pretty valid. So he counseled him to remain home and to take a wife. It's in this section that we get a really interesting quote from Tolkien where they were essentially attempting to cure Aldarion of his sea longing by having him marry Erendis and thinking that that would be enough to keep him on the lands of Númenor. It wasn't. Once again, Aldarion departed from Númenor, and this time the king refused to bless his voyage by bestowing the traditional green bough of return on his vessel, and so at this point, Erendis schemed with the queen to bring it to him anyways. Now this won Aldarion's love, and he returned to Númenor sooner than he had initially planned because he was very impressed by Erendis' actions here. He brought her back a large diamond, which Meneldur said was an inappropriate gift unless it were meant as a betrothal gift, and Aldarion insisted that it wasn't. Once again, Aldarion departs, and this time it was in open defiance of the king, so you can see things are getting more hostile as time goes on. The king then rescinded Aldarion's authority as lord of the ships and havens. He closed the guild house of the Venturers and shipyards, and he forbade the felling of trees for shipbuilding. When Aldarion came back 5 years later, he was very unhappy to see the conditions of everything, and so he left again pretty quickly afterwards. And this time he was gone for so long that the people began to fear for him. So after 10 years of this journey, Erendis returned to her home because she had believed that he had died. And then finally, after 14 years, he finally returned. When he did return, his ships had been greatly damaged, and I think Meneldur's heart was softened because he had been gone for so long. So in this time, Aldarion was pardoned, His titles were restored, and then he was also given the additional title of Master of Forests. Aldarion was very proud, and he wouldn't seek out Erendis, and so he busied himself with his work instead. But by chance, he came upon Erendis as she was in the forests, and he thought she was so beautiful. He even thought she was one of the Eldar. And in this time, they were reconciled. He apologized, and they finally agreed to be betrothed. Erendis reluctantly agreed to sail with Aldarion around the coasts of the island, and as she did, they had a great feast. In this time, Valandil gave Erendis the title Daughter of Uinen, or New Lady of the Sea, and this name offended her, and she replied, "Call me by no such name. I am no daughter of Uinen, rather she is my foe." So even before they are fully betrothed, you can see that there's a lot of resentment and bitterness growing as she hates the sea, which is something that Aldarion loves. So she would not be betrothed to Aldarion until she had spent time with him inland. Because of how much time he had spent out in the sea, she wanted to make sure that he was able to spend time in her own realm. Now, Erendis would not be betrothed until Aldarion had spent time with her inland, so they dwelt in Emeria for a time. In this time, she says things like, "I will not share my husband with the Lady Uinen." And her mother actually advises her, saying, "All or nothing, Erendis, so you were as a child, but you love this man, and he is a great man, not to speak of his rank, and you will not cast out your love from your heart so easily, nor without great hurt to yourself. A woman must share her husband's love with his work and the fire of his spirit, or make him a thing unlovable." So she and Aldarion had had a bit of a fight, and then they were reconciled at this time and finally betrothed. She wore her betrothal gift, which turns out it was that diamond, on her brow, and she was called Lady of the Starbrow. Now, Aldarion remained for 15 years in Númenor until the sea longing gripped his heart once more. Tolkien writes, "Then suddenly the sea longing took him as though a great hand had been laid on his throat, and his heart hammered and his breath was stopped." Everyone around them was able to tell that something was wrong, but Erendis' mother said that they shouldn't talk about it, which is horrible advice. Meanwhile, Aldarion thinks that his father is scheming with Erendis to push him towards marriage and rushing things, and so he becomes a little bit resentful and suspicious. And at last, at the end of this section, Aldarion confesses his sea longing to Erendis, which grieves her, but she knew what was going on anyways, and he says that he's got to go, so he leaves for 6 years. And that brings us to the end of this week's section. So just a quick summary of the timeline. The year 800, Aldarion is proclaimed the king's heir. In 858, Aldarion is finally betrothed to Erendis. And in 861, Aldarion and Erendis forswear their wedding until his return. And he leaves for his 6-year voyage in 863. So that's right about where we stop. Discussion notes. This is a recap from our book club discussion. We had a lot of really interesting things come up in our chat, and so I wanted to summarize them here in this video. A major theme of our discussion is that interpretations of this story are going to vary largely based on your personal experience. There's something very personal about this story. The way that it deals with a marriage in great detail is something that you don't get a lot of in Tolkien, and so it's a very unique story, and it definitely caught me off guard, especially compared to the way that the rest of this book is written. So I thought it was very interesting, very different, but a really enjoyable story. The importance of Erendis not being from the line of Elros is something that's going to come up throughout their story. Because she was not from the line of Elros, she had less time, and the years spent waiting on Aldarion were more detrimental to her than they were to him, who had a longer lifespan. The symbolic nature of the Bow of Return. We see this decline throughout the story. First, he leaves with it, then he obtains it through secrecy, and then ultimately he's denied it. And so when he departs for his final journey in this section, Erendis sets the Bow of Return on the prow of a ship, though she hides her tears. And when he returns, the bow has been withered from the cold. And Erendis remarks that she's glad she didn't go with him because she would have withered sooner than any green bough. And that's definitely very symbolic of their relationship and what's to come. There's also no clear good guy in this story, with this very, very tumultuous relationship that we're going to cover more next week. But these are two broken people who were pushed into marriage out of a cultural necessity and with a lot of parental meddling. It's also in this section that Tolkien writes, "Cold is the life of a mariner's wife." And the mariner who is single out of purpose and not tied to the shore goes further and learns how to deal better with the sea. So that's an important quote to keep in mind. We also see the seeds of jealousy of Uinen and the sea. Erendis is exhibiting extreme jealousy from the beginning of their relationship, so we're going to see where that goes as her life continues. And we also agreed in our discussion that this is a really good foreshadowing for the Fall of Númenor. Aldarion is being far-sighted. He's gripped with the sea longing, and we're going to see this come to fruition in the next section. But his restlessness and his desire to kind of expand his horizons and go forth from Númenor is going to become more and more common throughout Númenor's history as we go down the line. The last point of discussion that we covered is the Valar guarding the sea around Númenor. Now, Tar Meneldur reminds Aldarion in this section that the Valar have protected the Númenorians in their sea voyages, and he reminds him to not be overproud or this grace may wane. And once again, that's something to keep in mind as we continue throughout. So we will pick up next week with part 5 of our book club, where we cover the second half of the story of Aldarion and Erendis, from the wedding of Aldarion and Erendis to the accession of Tar Aldarion, and that is going to be pages 83 through 114. Thanks so much for listening this week. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I will be back next week with part 5.